Hello there, my name is Ismos and this is part 3 of our tutorial of our training series, and this time we're going to be looking at baking in Blender. So we have made the texturing, added the materials we want to our object, but if we exported this to a different application, the mesh would be imported but the materials would be messed up because different 3D applications handle materials or shaders differently from Blender. So if say you exported this to 3ds Max with the materials that we have set up here, they will not render correctly. You won't have the textures as they look here because 3ds Max handles materials differently from Blender. Same with an application like Cinema 4D or any other application you can think of. They use a completely different material system or shader system than Blender. So the way you work around that is that you have to bake all the textures you have, all the shaders into an image map. So you have a diffuse map, roughness map, and a normal map to have a PBR workflow that can be shared between different applications. So in Blender we have the principal shader, which can be used to create PBR, to kind of have a PBR workflow, and each modern or advanced 3D application has an equivalent to the principal shader in Blender that can help you achieve the same results using PBR workflow. So if we export those maps, the roughness, diffuse, normal map, and all the other materials that are the other maps that we want to export, we can achieve the same look that we have in Blender in all the different applications. So that's what we're going to do here. So let's begin. Obviously, the object you want to bake, the materials you want to bake, make sure that the object you are baking has UVs, and we did that in the previous tutorial, and you can see how the UVs look. I think they look good enough. So just to make my workflow simpler, I usually add a few icospheres, UV spheres, that are the number of materials that I have that I want to bake. So we have this wood material and this leather material. So I duplicate these and then assign the different materials to those objects. That way, if I want to select any of the different materials, I just select these two here. Because if you had multiple materials, say like multiple objects with different materials that you wanted to bake, then you'd have to navigate to that material, select it, and then come in here and then find the other. So I usually like keeping them near me or near somewhere I can easily select them from directly here. And so the other thing you want to do is go to each material and add an image texture. So Shift A, texture, image texture. Let me show my shortcuts here. So Shift A, then image texture. We want to create a new image where we're going to bake the materials. So I'll just call this bake and give it a good resolution. So let me multiply this so that we have a 2K resolution for this. Big enough to capture the detail, but not too big to take a lot of time baking. So yeah, this is what we have, and you want to, for each material you want to bake onto this image, you want to copy this texture and paste it on that. So I'll just select this material and select this node, copy and paste it here. Sometimes the pasting doesn't work, so you might, if it's not working for you, just go through the process of adding an image texture, but instead of creating a new material here, a new image here, just add the texture we had here. So it's called bake. I select it from the drop down list there, and you'll be good to go. So now we are good to go with the baking. So we're going to start with the diffuse shader, which is the color map of this. Let me change this into the image editor. Let me change this to UV editor so that we can see the UVs and the baked image. I'll switch this to bake so that we can preview the bake. Then select the objects that I want to bake, and you can see all the objects that I've selected have this material, have this image texture that we want to bake the material to. So let me put this aside. So now we can go to the render settings and start baking. So as of now, if it doesn't have a bake option, so you need to use cycles, and that you can see at the bottom here. We will have, after you switch to cycles, you will have the bake options down here, and we can start baking. So if you hit bake right now, you see that it's going to take quite some time to bake, because if we go to the samples, we have our render sample set to 128. That's a lot of samples for just a diffuse map. Just a sample of one is enough to render the maps we need, except if you're trying to bake something like ambient occlusion, that will require more than a few samples. But for diffuse, roughness, and any other sample and any other maps or normal map, a sample of one is enough. So if we hit bake, just give it a minute, you can see how fast it's now baking. Also make sure that when you're baking, you have the image you want to bake to selected. Otherwise, if you have another image selected, the bake will be the textures will be baked to that image. So make sure you have the bake image selected. You can see we have a few issues here. The samples are too few for the shadows and the ambient occlusion. Because we are baking a combined image that includes diffuse, glossy transition, transmission, ambient occlusion, and everything. But we don't need this. We don't need to bake everything. We just need to bake the different maps separately, and that should also help with these kind of low samples. So we don't want to bake the shadow because that will add the shadows directly on this image, and if you move the lights after you bake, the shadows will stay in the position they are, and we don't want that. So let's change the bake type to only diffuse, so that we only bake diffuse. Also, you will notice that we have 3 more buttons here. We have direct, indirect, and color. So these two mean the type of lighting you're using in your scene. So if you have any indirect lighting, that means you have an emitter in your scene that is kind of emitting light. I don't really know if that's. I think this is global illumination and things like that. Direct lighting is light from the light. So that means that if you have this enabled, you also be baking the light that is hitting your mesh. That means that the dark areas will stay dark and the bright areas will stay bright, meaning that when you move your light after bake, it won't affect the shading on your asset, and that's not what we want. We want to bake only the color, which is the diffuse, so that the bake is independent of the light, so that if we want to move the light, we can move it afterwards. So let's make sure that we set the influence only to color, and now we can bake. Also, if you notice here, you can see after we baked, you can see some of the baked pixels are intersecting with the different parts because our margin, which is just padding given to the bake or the islands. So whenever Blender is baking, it adds a few extra pixels, so that if it adds basically bleed room, so that the textures don't bleed into the other textures, and that is determined by this margin. The higher it is, the more you get this extra bake. So I'll just set it to kind of 3 pixels because I don't need that much margin. And now if we bake, you see that it's even much faster because we are only baking the color. We're not baking the indirect lighting or direct lighting. You can see what we're having. Okay, so we skipped the legs, so I'll also select them. Make sure every object you want to bake, you want to include in the bake, you have it selected, and now can bake, so that we bake everything. So another advantage of baking assets is that if you have multiple assets in your scene, and they are using these kind of procedural type of shaders and not just a single image texture, Blender has to calculate all of these individual nodes, and that builds up on the CPU requirements for your scene. So if you have a lighter scene with fewer with PBR textures like the ones we are baking, your scenes will be lighter and they will also render faster. So that's including evenings in Blender EV. If you have PBR textures or PBR shaders in your scenes, your scene will render faster, and it will be smoother for you and faster for your computer. So we have this baked, so I can save this as chair diffuse, and for the roughness we don't have to change anything. We just have to change the bake type here and switch to roughness, hit bake, and it should bake out the roughness. Basically what it's doing is baking out the results from that are being inputted here for the roughness, and for the diffuse it's baking out the input for this base color. For the normal map it will bake the results that are inputted here, that have been put here. So for all the other bake types you see here, if you have anything in the ambient occlusion, okay, so the ambient occlusion is calculated outside the principal shader, but that will be added if you do that. So this is our roughness map, and we can save it as well. So I'll rename this as roughness. And we need to bake the normal map because they give us those small bumps. So we can change this to normal map, hit bake, and you can see the bumps we have here. So the bumps I'm getting on this chair, they're not that much, so I'm just going to come in here and increase the strength a bit, maybe to 0.5, so that they can come out a bit stronger, so that we can see them here. Maybe let me put it at 0.1, let me try 0.2. Yeah, so let's rebake. Yeah, I think now they look a bit better. And again, save this as the normal map. Chair. Okay. Chair map. Sorry. Chair normal. Okay, so let me save this as blend as PBR to indicate that we are using a PBR shader here. And now I can come in here. I don't need these textures anymore, and I can also remove these materials because we want to switch from this node setup to a PBR node setup. So we can create a new material. I'll call it chair PBR. Now we can import the images we have baked out and create a PBR workflow that we can use in a different application that uses PBR. So we can import the diffuse, and now though these can use a single a single material, though they are different materials. So as you saw previously, this was a leather material, and we had a separate material for it, and we had a wood material separate for these wooden parts. But now they can share the same material because we are using a PBR workflow, and it can tell which parts are wooden and which parts are non-wooden. So You can see if we give this the same chair PBR material, you can see it retains its texture material, and this will have its wooden material. So we just need to add in the roughness. And you can see exactly as it was before, and then we can add the normal map. So in Blender, the normal map doesn't just go directly to the normal map, because you can see they're different. The output for the normal map here is different for the normal input here. So we need to add a few nodes here. We need to convert this into a normal map, from an image to a normal map with a normal output. So connect this to this, and again, this doesn't go directly here because we need to have some control. For some reason, when I tried connecting this directly into the normal map, it kind of doesn't shade correctly. I can see how we kind of, you see how it's shading differently. So what I found works is that if you pass this through a bump map like that, and instead of connecting it to the normal map here, you connect it to the displacement shader, sorry, displacement input here, or output. You can see now we get that, and now you can control the strength directly using the normal map here. So this is I think an issue in if you're using Eevee, but in Cycles it should be okay. So if we switch to Cycles here, I don't think it matters if you are inputting this in the normal map of the shader or the material output. So that's how you create baked PBR textures in Blender. And if we had a metallic part on this, we would just bake that as well, but we don't. So yeah, thanks for watching.